if the administration achieves its goal of deporting 1 million immigrants annually, the U.S. will lose nearly 6 million jobs as a result of it over Trump's term. More than 2.5 million of those losses will be amongst U.S.-born workers. When you're headed into a slowdown, those revisions tend to be larger. It's not an absolute, we're falling off a cliff yet, but the way I would say it is that if we were entering a recession, this is what it would look like.
The U.S. economy is navigating some key changes, including recent leadership changes at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a new big, beautiful bill budget that we can analyze with the next guest. Heidi Shierholz, president of the Economic Policy Institute and former chief economist at the Department of Labor under President Obama, will be getting her outlook for economic growth and policy changes. Welcome to the show, Heidi. Good to see you.
It's a delight to be here.
Thanks for being here. I want to just get your outlook and your analysis of current economic trends before we get into some of the recent news. So as you know, quarterly change for GDP in Q1 was only 1.2%. The annual change is 4% from Q2. So a big growth from a year ago. The unemployment rate currently at 4.2%. The monthly change is slightly it's still below the long-term average of 5.6%. But it is picking up. Mm-hmm. And as you know, inflation is also picking up. Consumer spending from Q1, currently $58 billion, is slightly higher. And the leading economic indicator from the conference board is been trending down, a monthly change. Negative 3%, 0.3% rather, decline from May. So it's a little bit of conflicting data. If you just look at the surface, GDP on the one hand is growing considerably, while at the same time, consumer confidence is slightly up. And like I said, the LEI is slightly down. How are you interpreting what's going on right now?
It seems really clearly like a slowdown. And so when you look at the GDP numbers, second quarter was strong, but first quarter was large and negative. And so there were some sort of statistical artifacts causing that swing. And so it's important to look at the overall growth rate of the first half of the year together. And when you do that, it just shows a big decline from 2024. And then the jobs numbers, right? The unemployment rate at 4.2%. That's still low, but the problem is the direction. It is rising. And what we are seeing, at least in the last 3 months, is we are not seeing job growth that is fast enough to keep the unemployment rate from rising. That's the scary thing. So over the last 3 months, we added just 35,000 jobs per month on average. That coming out was the thing that made Trump get so angry that he actually fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, accusing them of baselessly accusing them of cooking the books. So it is a slowdown, but we don't, I should qualify that in saying we could still pull out of this. It's not an absolute, we're falling off a cliff yet. But the way I would say it is that if we were entering a recession, this is what it would look like. We're seeing the slowdown in GDP. We're seeing the slowdown in job growth. We're seeing the pickup in the unemployment rate. Those are the kinds of things that it would be looking like if we were headed into a recession. Too early to know for sure. But what we can say unambiguously is that in recent months, things are growing substantially more slowly than they had been.
Americans have been concerned about inflation, although recently, if you take a look at some of the surveys, the expectation for inflation has been coming down slightly. I just want to point out something, Heidi. So in Trump's first term throughout 2017 to 18, when he first implemented tariffs, the CPI, as released by the BLS, as you can see here, didn't significantly spike up. It wasn't until after we got the pandemic that we had this huge spike to 9.1%. I wonder if fears of a return of high inflation this time in a second term are warranted, given that the first time we had tariffs, nothing really substantial happened to the overall CPI print.
Yeah, I think that big spike during COVID, that was about the impact of COVID and also the impact of war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Sure.
We are unlikely to see anything nearly that close to that with tariffs, but we are very likely to see a price increase as a result of tariffs. It is when tariffs come in, it is a tax on import. It is an increase in tax that importers pay. And it's just like any other tax, right? They pay it to the Customs and Border Patrol, but then it goes into the US Treasury just like any other tax. It is technically paid by the importer. But what a whole bunch of evidence shows us is that it just gets passed on to consumers, essentially. And so we will expect to see prices rise. I do want to caveat all that by saying I'm not opposed to tariffs in all situations. Like tariffs, when they are used as a narrow part of a broader strategic plan, like one piece of a broader strategic plan to support a domestic industry that, we want to support strategically, like say, okay, prices for consumers are going to be a little higher, but it actually matters for us to strategically support this industry. So we're going to do tariffs. Like that can be a very, very good use of tariffs. That is not what the vast majority of the Trump tariffs are. They're really high, broad, sort of across the board. And they are then, as a result, pretty much just doing things like disrupting supply chains and increasing prices. And we haven't seen that all show up yet, but we're starting to see that creep in. I expect to see increases in prices going forward, but it's not going to be anything like. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do not believe it will be anything like the spike in inflation that we saw during the pandemic.
One thing that was interesting to note is that even though tariff revenues have dramatically increased this year, the deficit has still widened. Why is that? I mean, in theory, shouldn't the offset from higher revenues and tariffs be enough to counter rising spending from the federal government?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the specifics right now, but what we know is that the overall Trump agenda is going to dramatically increase the deficit. Like with the reconciliation bill, they put in, there's absolutely draconian cuts to Medicaid, to food stamps. Tens of millions of people, or 15 million people, will lose health insurance. Tens of millions of people will lose support in purchasing groceries. Like it's just a real attack on the most vulnerable families. And that bill is the tax cuts in that bill that will go primarily to the richest households are so big that even with the draconian cuts to the most vulnerable, it's still going to raise the deficit by trillions. So that is like, I can't speak to the changes in the deficit over these short periods. But if you look over the long haul, we are going to see an absolutely ballooning deficit. And that is because of going to be largely because of the huge tax cuts that will go primarily to the very wealthy that were in the reconciliation bill.
What is, per your research and your experience, been the relationship between rising deficits or shrinking deficits, for that matter, and economic growth and ultimately prosperity for the middle class?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about this one in particular. So I think the economic impact of the increase in the debt that we're going to see as a result of the reconciliation bill, one thing, it's going to play out gradually. We're not going to see it all hit all at once. I mean, part of that is due to the fact that the bill in many cases was sort of designed under pretty cynical political type timelines. Like some of the tax breaks go into effect right away. Some of the most egregious and least popular cuts to benefits go into effect after the midterms. But what we will see, so that the impact will play out gradually. And I do want to be clear, I am not a deficit hawk, right? Like that is not the space I operate, I inhabit in the world. But the explosion of debt in this bill will be really harmful. And I think it's useful to think of that for two reasons. One, purpose matters. Like if you're increasing the debt to respond to a national emergency or to make like transformative investments in things like climate or healthcare or education that will actually make our country richer and more productive in the future, I would absolutely be singing a different tune. But this debt is being taken on for the sole purpose of making the rich richer. So it's just economically indefensible. And then, so that's one, purpose matters. And then two, context matters. Like the debt is already way too high, in part because we recently did have to respond to a national emergency, the pandemic, and also because of the huge Bush and Trump 1 tax cuts. And then right now, both inflation and interest rates are too high. So that means increasing the debt further will likely lead to some combination of either higher inflation and or higher interest rates. So those things will erode workers' paychecks, increase borrowing costs for families. It's just it's not good for the economy at a time like this to be increasing the deficit for no reason other than to make the rich richer in this country.
Okay, let's talk about the labor market, a topic that you are an expert in. So I'll take the screen to show you here, Heidi. This is the wage growth tracker by the Atlanta Fed. And as you can see, it's been trending down ever since it peaked in 2022, although it is still higher than the historical average. Now, if you were still chief economist of the Labor Department, how would you reverse this trend? Well, first of all, would you even advise that to be a priority, given that it's still higher than the historical average?
I think that historical average, the median wage, has been growing much more slowly, over the long arc, over the last 4.5 decades, than it should or could be. The things that I would do to increase wage growth, like this chart that you have up here shows the median wage. The first thing I thought of, though, was increasing wage growth for those at the bottom. We should increase the minimum wage. The minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, is an unbelievable $7.25 an hour. It has not been increased in over 15 years. It's just outrageous that we have a federal minimum wage that low. So that's one thing I would immediately do. The other thing we know, if you look at the really solid evidence, is that unionization is incredibly important for raising the wages of the middle class. So we know good research shows that workers who are in unions make more and they have better benefits than similar workers who are not in unions. So union workers who have the same characteristics, like the same occupation, the same geographic area, the same industry, the same gender, race, age, experience, education level. You control for all those things. People in unions do better than people who aren't in unions. And then the other do better on wages and benefits. And then the other thing is, in places where union density is high, in industries where union density is high, that has strong spillover effects because unions actually kind of set standards more broadly. And so that means the unions don't just raise the wages for the workers who are union members, but also for non-union workers who aren't, for whatever reason, able to get in a union, that their sort of unionized brothers and sisters actually still raise their wages. So it really makes an important difference. And then the third, there's many sort of levers to pull to close that wage gap. But the other one that I would say is we need to make sure unemployment remains low. Like high unemployment is very bad, not just because people lose their jobs. It is bad because it hurts the wage growth of those with jobs. And the logic is absolutely straightforward. It's just your employer does not have to pay you as much as they otherwise would when they know you don't have outside options. Employers just do not have to pay as much to get and keep the workers that they need when unemployment is really high. And that actually matters. It matters. That is true across the wage distribution. So for low wage workers, middle wage workers, and high wage workers, but it is more true the farther down the wage distribution you go. So it's true for high wage workers. It's more true for middle wage workers. It's the most true for low wage workers. So in order to, get wages growing more quickly for working people, that's another thing that I would do. Protect the economy, keep the unemployment rate from rising. And what we see is that Trump policies are sort of going in the other direction.
How would you respond to the counter argument that perhaps if we were to raise the minimum wage further, that could risk people getting laid off because employers can't afford to pay them more? And so that would actually increase the unemployment rate, especially at the bottom tier of income distribution. Instead, we should let the free markets decide what to do. And if we have a competitive labor market, naturally the wages should be higher.
Yeah, that is a really, really important question. And you sort of get at the crux of it when you said, if we have a competitive labor market, then it should work itself out. The wages will be set at the market level. There is, in labor economics, I would go so far as to say there is no other topic that is as studied as the impact of raising the minimum wage on employment levels. And that's because we have 50 states and the District of Columbia, and they're all, and cities and counties, there's people, different jurisdictions are raising their minimum wages all the time. And so you have these natural experiments, this county raised its minimum wage and the adjacent county did not. And so you can actually really look to see what happened to wages and employment in those two counties that are essentially the same, but for their minimum wage increases. And those studies that do that very carefully show that the minimum wage increases that we have seen have not caused substantial job loss. They have raised wages, but they have not caused substantial job loss. And the reason, this loops back around to your comment about in a competitive labor market, it should work itself out, right? What we know is that perfect competition is not actually a plausible approximation to how most labor markets actually work. I think economists, the economics field, used to feel that, let me back up and say some of the assumptions of a competitive labor market will kind of blow your mind when you hear them. It's so I'll tell you a few of them. So one assumption of a competitive labor market is that employers have zero say over what wages they pay their workers. They have to pay the exact going wage. And if they pay their workers 1 cent less than that, that worker will be able to immediately go find another job where they are paid fairly. And in fact, all of their employees would actually quit and go find another job where they are paid fairly. And that employer that paid them less than, that suppressed their wages would immediately go out of business. So it's just absolutely crazy assumptions, right? But that's how economic models are. They're not always crazy assumptions, but they're stylized, right? And I think it used to be that in the economics field, most economists believed that that set of assumptions was a reasonable approximation to how the labor market works. That's no longer the case. Economists, the sort of broader economics field really gets that that's a specific case. But in most cases, particularly in the low wage labor market, employers really do have power to set wages lower than the market clearing wage to suppress workers' wages. And that's why when you raise the minimum wage, you don't see job loss because they are suppressing workers' wages. So when you're raising the minimum wage, you're actually getting the wages closer to an efficient wage. But that's, regardless of the theory, that's how the empirics play out, that minimum wage increases. If you look at the weight of the evidence, it's really, really clear they've increased wages without causing significant job loss.
Well, let's talk about the data itself. As you're aware, Trump fired the BLS commissioner, Erica McAntifer, last week or a week and a half ago over what he claims was rigged data. So revisions came in. It was the biggest downward revision in, I believe, 50 years. I know revisions are a natural part of the process, but this one was exceptionally large. Trump claimed that the data was, in his words, rigged. Was it rigged?
It was not rigged. It was absolutely not rigged. One of the ironic, I guess, things about this is one of the reasons those revisions were so large was, in my mind, undoubtedly because of Trump's actions to cut staff at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Like, they have been cutting staff left and right, which means, I'll just give you one example for how this can play out. So the data come in, the jobs numbers come in. And what I will say is that this is a survey, right? Like these numbers, they're not mandated by law. Other countries actually have it be mandated that you have to fill out these surveys. The United States does not. These countries voluntarily provide their data on a monthly basis to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But turns out they don't all get it in on time. So when the data are supposed to come in, if there is enough staff to go run down, right, and heckle the people who have the firms that haven't gotten their data in, then we have better data, right? But you fire BLS staff and we don't have anyone, or we have way fewer people to run down the people who haven't gotten their data in yet in a timely way. And so then when the data do finally start rolling in, we have much bigger revisions. So that is one reason why we saw, one reason why we saw unusually large revisions. And then the other thing, I think it's probably both of these things combined, is that when an economy is heading into a slowdown, revisions tend to be larger. And that is because this also gets at for example, sometimes businesses are slow in getting their data in. And so if they've said, I'm going to respond to the survey, I just haven't gotten it in yet, the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually just imputes their data for the first, the second, until they have the final, that, they always revise 2 months back. They don't get all the data in on time, and so they have to impute the numbers. And so it is absolutely natural that when you're imputing the numbers, you sort of guess that, I'm going to guess that what you did this month was pretty similar to what you have turned in the last few months. And when you're in a downturn, that's not necessarily a good assumption, or not necessarily a downturn. When you're in any kind of changing period in the labor market, either it's going way down or it's going way up, that assumption that businesses' employment is going to be what it was last month is much less of a good assumption, because there's a turning point. And so that's likely also another thing that happened, that as the better data, as the true data started coming in over the months when you didn't have it, and then as the months go by, you get the data in, and then the earlier data are revised. Totally natural, appropriate process. When you're headed into a slowdown, those revisions tend to be larger.
Well, you've called Trump's actions undemocratic and economically dangerous. So for our viewers watching right now, why should regular citizens who aren't economists care who's running the BLS and whether or not they're getting fired?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it does point to, it feels like most of the people in this country don't know what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is. Nobody would be able to name a Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner, right? Like it's just sort of goes under the radar because it's absolutely independent, nonpartisan. It's 2,000 data geeks. And I say that with utmost respect. 2,000 data geeks who work at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, not political. What they are doing is just trying to get the best measure of our giant, complex economy. And that is a really hard job. And they are committed to it. Like, like so unbelievably committed to it. That's one of the reasons that I'm confident that the data have not been manipulated yet, because I have zero doubt that if somebody does try to manipulate the data, we will have 2,000 whistleblowers. Like, that is the kind of commitment to the integrity, the credibility, the nonpartisanship of the numbers that you see among the civil servants at BLS. And I actually forgot your question because I started going off onto.
No, you kind of answered it. I think the question was whether or not this ultimately has any political and or grandstanding economic implication. I'm talking about the firing of the chief. Ultimately, why should we as citizens who aren't data geeks, so to speak, why should we care that this happened?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for reminding me. So it is, so having that independent, nonpartisan, we are just measuring the data kind of organization, which we had, like BLS, absolutely the envy of the world in terms of its ability to put out timely, accurate statistics. When you don't have that, your economy is going to run less well, because our economy runs on reliable data. Sure. Period. So the Federal Reserve and other macroeconomic policymakers use the data to make really impactful decisions about macroeconomic policy. Private businesses use it to make decisions about hiring and expansion, to know which way things are going. State and local governments use it to make plans, to make plans about where things are heading. Everyone needs accurate, nonpartisan data in order to make their plans. And when we don't have that, reasonable, responsible economic decision-making becomes impossible. It becomes.
So your argument is that the firing was partisan. It wasn't due to the fact that forget the fact that he called it rigged. Trump called it rigged. Let's just take that aside. Maybe the argument here is that maybe he fired the commissioner because there is a belief that there needs to be reform at the BLS. Mm-hmm. The quality of the data gathered recently is not up to par. And so therefore we've had these large revisions making the data unreliable. So she deserved to be fired due to incompetence is the argument. How would you say, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's just wrong. She's just, had bipartisan support. She's very, very much in the line of the entire history of BLS commissioners. The very large revision that we saw had to do with those two things I mentioned. One, the cuts at BLS meant there is just less staff to try to pull together this giant, we're trying to measure what's going on in all the businesses in the U.S. economy. It is just a giant undertaking, and it has to happen really fast. So there's just fewer people that, we've cut staff, fewer people who are available to do that work. And when you're heading into a downturn, which we may be, revisions tend to be larger. So I think it is not about Erica, the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner that was just fired. It is about the actions that DOJ took to try to shrink the Bureau of, and they are successfully shrinking the Bureau of Labor Statistics staff and the direction of the economy itself.
Well, let's say if you were head of the chief economist of the labor department again, would you help to design a system for surveying that could be a little more efficient and perhaps provide incentives for people to participate in these surveys so the data is even more extensive or more timely? Basically, would you reform the process at all?
Yes, I think if you were talking with any BLS person, they could talk at length about things that could be done to improve data collection, to improve data production, to improve timeliness. They are a bunch of professionals. When you're putting out a product, you always know what can be done to make it better. One of those things to make it better cost money. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been starved most recently by DOJ to a huge extent, but it didn't start there. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has lost funding or had, flat funding or not as big of increases as would be needed to keep up with like rising prices, et cetera, for a very long time. So it's just an agency that's been absolutely running on a shoestring, but 100%, if you were taking good faith folks about, is there anything that could be done to improve the quality of data, you could have a fantastic, like brainstorming session that would
maybe just one thing. What's one thing that comes to your mind?
This is not doable in this country, but one thing that comes to my mind, I'll say that, but then I'll go on to something for real. One thing that comes to mind is mandating it. Have Congress mandate that people have to fill out the surveys. But then another thing would be better engagement of businesses. Like if we have businesses out there at the forefront saying, people, you absolutely need to fill out these surveys, that could really help. You have the big banks out there with PSAs about how businesses need to be filling out. You could see, so that kind of outreach could make a difference. And that's just one very small example. Like there are just a lot of things that could be done. I'm in no way saying that BLS is perfect, but they are the envy of the world. Like they can always improve, like any large organization can that's doing a lot of work. But they are the envy of the world.
Perfect. Before we close off, I want to just touch on this report that the Economic Policy Institute published about the deportation of unauthorized immigrants in the economy and in the country, rather, and the effect of that on the economy. It's a rather extensive piece of research. A few FAQs, so to speak, that maybe you can address. First is that if we deport unauthorized immigrants, it automatically opens up jobs to Americans, thereby increasing labor force participation. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's not what's going to happen overall. So in the reconciliation bill, there's extreme immigration provisions. I think there's something that people don't know is that it increased the ICE budget so that ICE is nearly 3 times the size of the FBI. It makes the reconciliation budget made ICE larger than the military budgets of all but 15 countries on Earth. It's just a remarkable increase. It's like authoritarian style immigration regime, internment camps, massive deportation operations, the whole thing. I personally believe that is a moral catastrophe, but it will also be an economic one. It will cost jobs. So if the administration achieves its goal of deporting 1 million immigrants annually, the U.S. will lose nearly 6 million jobs as a result of it over Trump's term. And this is another thing. More than 2.5 million of those losses will be amongst U.S.-born workers. And those numbers are big because deportations, they don't just affect those who are being deported. They don't just affect immigrant communities, right? They ripple up and down supply chains. They ripple throughout the entire economy. So one way to think of this is when there are fewer immigrant roofers and framers, fewer homes get built. So electricians and plumbers and painters and everyone else loses work too. And so that's the sort of classic example of this ripple effect. And then deportations also reduce consumer demand. We obviously lose the spending of those who are being deported, but those who fear deportation also spend less, and on and on and on. It has ripple effects. So it will be a massive drag on the economy.
So, I mean, that makes sense, Heidi, but what is the middle ground here? So on the one hand, if we mass deport everybody all at once, that will have, as you've pointed out, an immediate impact on the labor force. But on the other hand, we can't have undocumented immigrants in the country. So what should be done? So
I think we need to sort of we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need comprehensive immigration reform that will have a path to citizenship for people who are already here and much tighter, smarter borders. Like that combination of things is the path forward for the country. And it has to happen on all sides. Like one of the things that we are seeing that the Trump administration is doing and hoping to do is to deport millions of workers and then bring in workers on temporary guest worker visas. That kind of policy is terrible. That is a bad approach to immigration. And one of the reasons why is many of those workers who are on temporary visas, they have zero power. In many cases, if they're not being treated well at work, if they complain in any way, if their employer then fires them, they can just be deported. So they have zero power. And that hurts not just their wages and working conditions. It hurts the wages and working conditions of US born workers that are working alongside them. So that is we need to make sure that we have a path to citizenship, immigrants with full rights in our economy, because otherwise, having a class of exploitable workers hurts not just those workers. It has huge ripple effects through the economy. So having a path to citizenship for people here, not beefing up the temporary guest worker visas, and then being really smart about border control.
I'm going to end on this note here. The founder of Singapore, one of the founding fathers, Lee Kuan Yew, had made a famous quote that he said the U.S. will likely stay preeminent because of the fact that immigrants come into the country, top talent from around the world. I wonder, just dovetailing off of that quote, I wonder how the recent changes to immigration policy could impact long-term the future of immigration into the U.S.
Yeah, that's a scary thought, because I think that is absolutely right. The U.S. has been the beneficiary of brain drains in the rest of the world, right? Not in the entire rest of the world, but from many, many countries. And the loss of that will reduce our growth, will reduce our productivity growth, will just make us poorer over the long run. I hope that what Trump is doing will be able to be reversed.
But will there be a loss of proper immigration because of these policies? Will that be affected?
Yes, I think the answer is an absolute yes. And then the question is, to what degree? How much will it actually end up hurting us going forward? And that depends on, I think, how soon we are able to undo what's been happening. I mean, one of the things that I just saw this is a little bit of a different question, but it kind of gets at this overall, the idea that, we have a big military presence in Washington, D.C. right now as a result of, Trump calling in the National Guard into D.C. So, the claim is we're making it safer. We're what you see, if you look at restaurant spending, it has absolutely plummeted in Washington, D.C. People are scared to be out in Washington, D.C. right now. And so that's a little bit different, but it sort of gets at when you do these kinds of measures, people don't want to go to where you are. People want to go somewhere else where they feel safe. And so I think we are absolutely going to be seeing that. And the question will be just how soon will we be able to reverse these policies? Will help dictate how long-term the damage this country is.
Well, just one final note before we go, Heidi. Proponents of Trump's immigration policies would say, well, where would they go? I mean, America is still the dominant center for innovation, for technology, for higher education. The land of opportunity is still the U.S. I mean, what are the alternatives, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of other countries. It is that is one of the reasons that we've been a big draw, but you make this country not safe, not palatable to people around the world, and they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to other peer countries of the U.S. And bring their ingenuity, their their like potential for productivity growth. They're going to take it elsewhere.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Where can we learn more from you, Heidi, and your work?
You can go to epi.org.
We'll put the link down below, so make sure to follow the EPI there. We'll speak again soon. Heidi, welcome to the show. Take care.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.